such a graceful transition it always is from me pressing buttons and then trying to sit down.
Yeah.
Like I'm not, also the producer as well as the host of this show. Anyway.
I felt you slide into that smooth sort of Baileys and espresso kind of moment when you sat down and made the eye contact.
Yeah.
It's very professional.
If nothing else, this show is about eye contact.
Yeah.
Even though it goes out as an audio podcast as well eventually.
Right. So are we going to start with 5 minutes of eye gazing or?
That would be something that I would probably cut from the audio version and would lose us our 3 watches on YouTube, but
okay.
I'm not against it.
Okay.
But welcome to the show in any case.
Thank you.
Alyrah, thanks so much for joining us and for sharing a kombucha and soda water as well as your lovely presence. It's so good to see you.
You too.
Now, for people who haven't heard you, heard your music, how would you describe what you do?
It's definitely dance music. It's definitely everything has to have groove, and I like fat beats, I like bass, and I like lots of little techie elements. So it's when you say electronica, people tend to think, techno, basically. So I've always been trying to get past that, and I use, some big choir sounds, orchestral sounds, and there's a genre fusion thing going on. There's breaks, sometimes there's trap, there's hip hop, house, and it can be quite ambient with the vocals, a lot of layers, a lot of harmonies, big space sounds, and try to get the galactic feeling in there. Used to be just me and guitar, but I couldn't realise what I was hearing in my head. So having a program to be able to do that is pretty ideal. I've had difficulty when people say, what genre is it? I've had trouble squeezing it into a box. So I just encourage people to come and find out.
Yeah, nice one.
Yeah.
So when did you transition from guitar to producing your own stuff?
My brother was always way better with tech and worked in IT and was like really computer savvy, and I wasn't. I was a total technophobe, and he said, I want to see you doing your own thing, and I'm going to help you set up a home setup. And I was a bit resistant around it. This was maybe about 10 years ago that he started, or was it? No, not that long, pushing me into it. And then I didn't really put the effort into really trying to learn because I still had so much like tech phobia going on. And I started going to other people, like mainly, of course, dudes who were more into being techie, and I kind of was like, somebody else take care of it. I don't want to have to learn things, and I'm not procedurally good, and I don't want to spend hours sitting at a computer. But then once I realised the creative control issue, that was the incentives to start really getting into it. And that was really only a few years ago. Yeah.
It is, when you say dudes sitting in front of computers making music, that just rings every bell.
Yeah.
For me. It's just, it feels like such a, when you talk about instrumental and electronic music being sort of like procedural, or even if you are, pardon me, running your own band and doing your own recordings, the amount of time that you'll spend sitting at a screen is inordinate and kind of
huge,
painful and brutal. And it's one of the things that, because if you get into music because you like performance, can be very bizarre to suddenly find yourself spending, countless hours just like buried deep in like a menu, trying to fiddle with sounds. And
it's not social.
No.
Like if you're a social person, you're extroverted, you're a performer, and you're a mover as well. Like I used to, do a lot of dance training and stuff. Sitting still is, with no one to talk to, is torture. But yet, necessary.
Yes, that's right. And yet the results can definitely be worth it if you get get the balance right.
Well, now I love it.
Yeah.
But when I had all those dead ends that I'd run into not knowing how to do things and how to engineer things, and that was, I mean, you know, I would say my production still leaves so much to be desired compared to the like how I would like to sound and, you know, who I look up to, obviously. But being able to get something together in a way that people can vibe to in the least, and you can get down to your own stuff is, yeah, pretty gratifying.
And how do you find that you've been enjoying translating that into a live context?
I used to not like playing live. I used to feel like really stressed by the number of things that could go wrong, all the tech problems that could go wrong, especially if you're using a laptop. There's that whole thing of like, what am I giving people as an experience? And, you know, that would you have something, how visual is it, you know? And mainly now I just kind of like, I sing the songs and kind of I'm DJing this sort of song within itself at the same time, doing different versions of it, and I'm dancing around getting into it, and I find that just does it. Like people just get down to that.
Yeah, if you don't sort of like hit space bar and stand with your hands by your side. I've seen so many shows where that's the extent of the quote unquote performance.
Yeah, right.
And I find it bizarre, and yet just the most basic of movements and the most subtle of changes in vibe that you can create. I think one element of electronic music performance and production that really frustrates me when it translates live is where people just have the track and they play the track without changing it and having any ability to adjust its dynamic or its flow or anything about it before a live audience. And it's something that you see like up at the top level right down to something like an open mic night. I mean, this is a small example, like at a hip hop night or something, or an open mic where it might be that there's like 10 people in the room. It's like sparsely attended and someone's got like a trap banger and they're going to, you know, do their track to 10 people as if it's, you know, and this is the thing where my background is, you know, playing guitar, and then I, you know, started a band and went solo and blah, blah, blah. I've done someone who's been able to fortunately play the music that I want to and record it the way I want to. When I see people who perform and they haven't made the music and then they're just sort of playing it and they've got no ability to change the dynamic.
See, this is the thing, is that if it's a fairly recent song, depends how old the song is, but like you should be ideally still playing with the song so that by the time you come to do a live show, you're in some stage of, you know, relationship of experimentation with different parts of the song and enjoying that. Because, I mean, as you know, the most addictive part of, well, maybe apart from performance, I'm getting into performance being more addictive, but is the novelty of songwriting. Right? So, and of course, you know, when you write a new song, you think, this is the best thing I've ever written, you know, and then you'll change your mind about that later on, right? So if you're still in some novelty process with it, then I think that translates live to, I'm going to loop this section, I'm going to try this, and then that creative energy's still there.
Yep.
And yeah, I really don't know how people do the whole like getting out there every night doing the same songs over and over and over again. Like, I think I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, people who run their acts like a business and successfully.
See, I don't have to do that.
Yeah, neither do I.
And this is a big one.
Well, it's funny because the ambition and the sort of distribution and reaching a large audience and converting a passion to a, you know, project and an ongoing
to a money
business
spinner.
Concern. Yeah, it's something that I respect and admire out of anyone who's doing it. You know, good luck.
Same.
Because it's brutal.
Well, we're in the most we're the most sort of facilitated to self-produce. You know, like what I can do in my own bedroom with a program is huge, right? Compared to just back in the day, I don't know, playing a cello and having some patron or something.
Yeah,
you
basically would need to convince someone to fund you to go into a record studio, because there was like maybe a 4-track, but the technological gap between what was available in a top studio and the number of them,
and the creative control that they had to tell you what you had to be in order to make that money, if you ever saw that money, right? Yes. So there's a bit of a myth around that, where people think they get rich and famous, but they might just be getting famous.
That's right.
You know, so I find it very funny that I've sort of started pumping my music out in probably one of the least lucrative times to be a musician.
Definitely.
And so that makes you have to reassess the whole thing, you know, the motives. And I think some people, when it comes to their art, have something that I confronted is like the childhood feelings of invisibility there, and wanting to, you know, when people want fame, it's like, I didn't feel noticed or validated as a kid, and this is going to make up for it. And I think it's really good to look that in the eye, and then you can move it along, because once I did that, into that being stuck in that need for social validation, I could drop it, and I didn't have the energy going into it, and I just put the energy into enjoying the artistic side of it.
Yep.
But I'm lucky, you know, and I know guys that they're hustling really hard. They're trying to support families, doing full-time music stuff, and I feel for them, you know, because it's a tough gig. It's their dream to be doing what they love. Whereas for me, I've had a day job, you know, being a teacher for forever. So I was able to sort of, you know, fund it from that. But then there's always the time element. So you get home at the end of the day, you're mentally tired, and you don't want to sit in a computer and work on, you know, you're not necessarily having new experiences if you're in that routine. So I think like a lot of us, you know, anyone we speak to would be struggling with all these sorts of issues.
It's the perennial problem for anyone who's an artist in the 21st century is trying to find something sustainable. Firstly, you know, artists that I really admire will just go on the internet, and this is something I've not seen before. Sage Francis, who's one of my hip-hop idols, was just on the internet the other day and being like, he was on his Twitter and just said, I'm getting older, I've funded my lifestyle. He runs a label, and he says, like, it's all been funded by relentless touring. I've got 2 young kids now and a family, and I can't, you know, what am I going to do? He's like, I humbly ask, you know, you or my like, you know, you the people that are supporting my music, should I do it, you know, do you have any ideas? Basically.
Wow.
And it was like a crowdsourced, everyone was like, mate, start a podcast, and, you know, like all of the things that sound like fantastic ideas if you're 19, you know, but this guy, you know, Sage has probably got to be nearly like in his mid to late 40s. I don't know exactly how old he is, and massive respect. I mean, there's no ill will or like, you know, judgment about what he's doing. I feel like it's incredible to be so honest and humble and open.
Well, the age factor though that you mentioned is definitely a thing, especially as a woman, because then you have that whole issue of like, you know, there's more about whether or not people want to look at you,
of course,
you know, as a performer, and you know, whether or not the big industry itself is focused so much on, you know, 19-year-olds and that sort of sex appeal. But really, when you look at as an artist, like the level of mastery that you get will only increase as you get older, you know. So it kind of, you know, but there's also what you produce when you're young in terms of those creative surges. I think like, you know, some of the material I have is from stuff that I wrote when I was 16 or 17, but I've only now developed the skills to be able to translate it, or have sourced the right people to be able to help me translate it if I want that.
Yeah.
And but that's beautiful. Like, you know, to realize a song, you know, years later that you couldn't do at the time the technology didn't exist, you know, in the same sort of way. So we have like maximum creative expression, but we're also competing in a bottleneck called the internet, where everyone's trying to, stake a claim. And I think I see a lot of angst around that. I see angst.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot to do with a lot of it is myth making, and a lot of it is the idea that you need to build like massive numbers before you go performing and start making a splash. So I think that a lot of people are uncomfortable. One thing that I see is a lot of people who hustle real hard on the internet and get numbers that look impressive and then do shows where people don't come because a lot of that is not real support. I think the opposite is true for me. For example, because I started organising shows, I don't know, it feels like forever ago. And the numbers, if you look at any of the numbers on my socials or whatever, they're not impressive, but I can fill a room with people.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
But the thing that I realised is that it's not just about me. I don't fill the room with my name alone. I fill it by having relationships with shitloads of great musicians
that
I
community
all put together. And and then because I run a show that has, I don't know, the show that we're doing together, Fiery Fundraiser on the 1st of Feb, is like 9 artists and 2 visual artists. And they're just all people that I got in my phone, like that I contact, they're all personal friends. We've done shows before. And there were lots of people that I asked and said yes, and they said yes, but it was too late. They didn't get back to me fast enough, etc. But
lucky me.
Being in that position takes ages, and you have to do shows that are poorly attended, quote unquote,
right,
to start. And I think that that's something. Ultimately, being part of a music community to me was my goal.
That's the rewarding part.
I heard Phil Collins, who is just a gold-plated prick, in an interview.
Okay.
But he talks. The one thing that he said stuck with me, which was that he said all I wanted to do was be respected as a drummer in wherever he was. I don't know, Liverpool or I don't know. Like I just wanted to be in the group of people that people knew were good drummers. And as I reached each new level of success, it's just like that's all that he ever wanted. And so, he just kept pushing because there was he had nothing to lose because he'd already reached one of his goals. And I suppose having modest goals for what you want your art to be is probably a very important thing if you're starting out and you want it to be sustainable, because if you have the mythology around making it, quote unquote, is so insane. And the idea that your creativity is dependent on attention or a certain level of attention even.
Right, that you're only an artist if people recognise you as an artist and see your stuff. And, I know people that are locked away creating a lot of music and art, and they either don't get it out there because that's kind of where they're getting their buzz actually, and that's always a potential one day I will, or they don't have the means in terms of promoting it or whatever, or the knowledge. And to those people, I'm like, you're an artist,
Yeah.
You're still an artist. Like if you feel compelled to create art and you get sad and depressed if you don't do it, whether that's dancing, drawing, music, whatever, you are an artist, and that's you don't need a commercial validation in that.
Or social. Even particularly the thing that's been, I suppose, really anxiety driving is if you were a band in the 70s and you were you got a record deal, you got a record pressed, sure, that means you had certain level of success. Whether or not that was going to translate into great success on the radio and people coming to shows, but nobody could deny that you had made a record and that
right,
you were part of a thing, and you were in this sort of small club of people who had the equipment and had the cachet of being yeah, we just pressed a record. But I think the democratization of production is wonderful in one way, in that it means that there's no barrier whatsoever to anyone there's obviously, some financial barriers and some time barriers and so on, but the barriers to production have fallen to the floor, but the distribution barriers are all still there. They're just different. And so the actual process of getting people's attention hasn't changed that much. Like, you still need some incredible fluke, some real coincidence of fortune where your art meshes so intensely with what people are looking for that you can, transcend whatever communications technology that's like Arctic Monkeys and MySpace, or Post Malone and YouTube. Like, there are just some people that get plucked out, and it seems incomprehensible. And
then everyone tries to surf that wave as well to their own success, which then creates even more of a bottleneck. And I think, like, when you're talking about bands in the 70s, it's good to look at like what your motives are, because when I think of bands in the 70s, I can think of 1,000,001 guys who must have thought that picking up a guitar and having a famous band was going to get them laid. And I can't say that motivates me as a woman in the same way. Like, I don't want groupies. It's weird. And then there's the don't take enough drugs for that. And then there's the sort of the social validation element, like you're talking about with Phil Collins, like to be respected. Like, I want people there's definitely an element there at first of I want people to tell me that I'm good at this. But in a weird way, for me, it was I would play because I liked it, and I'd write songs. And I started playing keys when I was 5 and guitar when I was 13, a very musical family, and, drumming. But playing for people, and then they would go, oh my God, you need to get your music out there. People need to hear your music. You should do this. Like, we need you, and then there's a weird sort of feeling of like I'm disappointing everyone if I don't do that in my lifetime, is try and get it distributed to a certain extent. And you think about, really how we used to live in smaller communities. We didn't have thousands of anonymous people to share our art with. Art was it was folklore, it was storytelling, it was sitting around the campfire, it was being the person who could, play the thing and sing the song beautifully and hold everyone together in community. And so you would have that immediate gratification. You would have people socially validating that you were good at the thing and give you the drum and let you lead the way. You know what I mean? Yes. You would have that. And now we're seeking it out in a bizarre way, coupled with the sort of internalization of this essentially capitalist idea that is if you're good at something, you're not truly good at something unless you're making money from it, unless you've commodified it, and there's no incentive to do it. And so why would you write a book if you weren't going to make money from it or that sort of thing? So.
Yeah, of course. I think that I encounter that idea all the time. Like the idea of, if you don't make it, then you stop, which is very strange.
You turn your attention onto other things that are going to be productive, and this idea of an investment. Your art is an investment that you get a return on. Really, what I realised with what I do, because I'm not making Justin Bieber, I kind of liken myself to an artist who would really just like somewhere to hang my paintings where people can see them. And this is where it comes to, like, I'm like, yeah, I'd like a small online audience. Sure. Like that would be great, so that when I write a song, even now just sharing my songs with my friends, there's a gratification in that often feels like enough, because it's that. And when I dig down with that, I look at why am I compelled to share my art? And I think that sort of, in a way, it's a selfish drive, like so many things. Like even altruism, doing good is selfish, right? Because it makes you feel good to help other people, right? So you can look at all that. But ultimately, I think we feel compelled to share it because this is it's the meme. It's the influencing consciousness, and art is essentially either questioning things or celebrating them, or and so we have a drive to do that socially. It's a human thing. So whether you get it out there to 5 people or 10 people or 5,000 people, that sort of the purity of that drive as an artist, or even it's just it's a place of where you heal,
Yes.
where you're with God, where you're with the universe, where you're transcendent is in your art. So you don't even have to share that with people. You know, there's I draw and I write, but I don't share that with people. That's for me, you know.
Yeah.
So I think being able to talk about these drives versus the, you know, need to the business industry side of it and what it's become in that regard, there's a bit of healing in that. You know what I mean?
I'm so with you. I think that one of the nice metaphors about service came from, I was listening to an interview with the guy from Fugazi. I forgot his name.
Okay.
But he started Fugazi. They were, you know, seminal punk band, started the straight edge movement. They were huge. And then Fugazi broke up or stopped, or what, I actually don't know the history of that band very well. And then he's, I think, in a band called Mates of State with just his wife, I think. And then he was being interviewed about what's it like to go from being in like a massive band that's like massively culturally influential and selling out theaters and, you know, small arenas and stuff to, you know, like quite a small band now. And he was saying, actually, it's fine because the most popular restaurant on the planet, you know, we all know what it is. It starts with an M.
Yep.
And everybody knows that they serve the most people, but they don't serve the best food. Nobody acknowledges that serving the highest number of people means that you have the highest quality in the restaurant industry. And what I'm doing now is like I've opened up like a 12-seater restaurant in my local, you know, community, and not as many people come in, but I get to do exactly what I want and I serve it special and people appreciate it. And I was like, that is the most beautiful metaphor.
Right.
And finding that concept of service is quite hard as a musician because there's some level of ego involved.
Are you there to give or take?
Commencing the enterprise. For me, when you were saying like guys who, you know, in the 70s wanted to get laid, the reason that
they still do.
Yes, exactly. I was going to
This
say,
just in.
yeah, that hasn't changed. Some things never change. So I picked up the guitar. I started when I was 6. My mother was very encouraging of music when I was young, and I played from 6 until about the age 10 or 12, and then I stopped. I was like, I've had enough. I do too many extracurricular things. It's the stress of like learning and practicing and stuff because I had a proper teacher, and I was like,
it's
too
the whole
much.
forcing the kid into it thing.
I wasn't.
Kills
Well,
the
it's
joy.
like I wasn't really learning how to write songs as well. Like I didn't. The self-expression part wasn't in there yet. But I remember vividly when I was 15, I was like, fuck, I need to learn guitar again. Because like I saw the way that girls looked at dudes who played guitar, and I was like, all right, I've got like a head start because I used to do that a lot. And so that's literally, I remember the reason I picked it back up. And then started writing absolutely terrible songs. But the other thought that I have, and I'm interested to see your thoughts on this, is that art is the ability to write songs and do art at all. I think is a great privilege that is very underappreciated.
Yeah, well, it's think about the quality of your life experience compared to someone who doesn't do that. I mean, it's a big ecosystem, and we need people to do all sorts of things. But I do feel very lucky that I was born to a musical family, and you know, my dad's Lebanese, so mum's, you know, Celtic descent, Aussie. So those influences are something that I used to, sometimes in that not having a place to belong and all that identity stuff, and you know, was felt like it was a bit of a curse. But when I look at the music I make, you know, I'm like, wow, you know, this is so unique, you know, those influences. So go on.
Oh, I was just going to say the other idea is that the expression of art, like you were talking about the need to do it, like if you're an artist, and that's something that I feel. It's something that I can't stop. There actually was a brief period where I tried to stop and making music because I was like, you know what, I like the idea of coming home and not having some kind of crazy, you know, futile mission to pursue. And so I was like, let's see if I can do that. That'd be nice to, like, some of my housemates would just come home and they wouldn't be like, all right, now I have to create a masterpiece or whatever.
Yeah, I envied those people that just had like pot plants in a clothes rack in their room and didn't have like all this music equipment
or just like could just happily watch TV for hours at a time and drink beers.
Envied that simplicity.
Yeah, I did as well. Particularly when I like wasn't quote unquote making it. And so I tried, and I was the most miserable I'd ever been. And so I have this theory that art is like human plumage. So when you've got like dancing birds in the Amazon, it's usually the males that put on the displays. And this might be a coincidence, but it's basically kind of like when there's plentiful resources around and just simply existing is not impressive. There's like, well, there's something more, like you got to display a bit more to kind of keep me interested. And so they'll make like little platforms and dance around. And in the new, I think it's Our World, that's Attenborough like narrated on Netflix. There's like multiple birds that they've recruited. So there's like the one bird, and he has like a little barbershop quartet. And I feel like doing those kinds of displays and plumage and stuff is about demonstrating what you're doing with your excess energy. It's like, hey,
it's a display of fitness for sure. I mean, you know, the peacock's tail says, I got around with this big heavy thing and I survived, so I must be pretty good. And there are a lot of different versions of that. And yeah, it is definitely a display. I mean, it's, you know, there's nothing sexier than intelligence, really, but there are many forms of intelligence, you know. So it's interesting because I think that, you know, when you're talking about how you picked back up your guitar, you know, at 13, I'm kind of seeing, you know, the sort of the ascendance, you know what I mean, from the sort of the more bass drives, you know, to the social validation and to the heart. And then ideally it's, you know, it meets somewhere in your lifetime when you're going to look back on it that is up here, that is truly transcendent, you know, with what you lived.
Absolutely. And just kind of the way that you've articulated that resonates a lot with me. I mean, because the music that I'm writing now with a young child is, you know, you're saying like, oh, the stuff I'm writing now has never been better. But truly, like, the inspiration is extraordinary. Like, I never thought that I could reach a level of unity with, you know, I also feel like for me, and you might have thoughts on this as well, is that art is my spiritual practice. Like, so writing songs and because
we've been fooled into thinking somewhere along the way that they're separate. Yeah. When you look at, I mean, you know, if you go to go to Peru or somewhere where there's, you know, traditional healing going on, and they are singing, to you, they are singing through you, you know. So it is you're literally, you know, you're sculpting the air with vibrations. You know, we see that kind of, you know, the sand forming the shapes from the notes, and we forget that it's extremely esoteric, it's extremely astral, extremely energetic, what we do with music and what we're invoking. And, you know, sometimes we want to empower people. I mean, you look at what punk is, and that is a righteous anger, right? Yeah. So I think there's this weird intellectual conceptualization of art where it's, you know, sort of like an urban kind of conceptualization of it, and we're forgetting that it's woven into everything. You know, the bone through your nose, the colors that you wear, like it's all on a continuum.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about your art as communion and transcendence with the divine. You're someone who's considered these questions of spirituality, I'm sure. What are your thoughts on it? How does it feel to you? What are you connecting to? How does that affect what you do and how you communicate with people?
Well, I've come to realize that music is extremely subtle in what it invokes and provokes, and it's extremely intuitive. You know, so I mean, you can't necessarily rationally explain why a certain combination of sounds gives you a certain feeling where you're like, ooh, you know, there's a pleasure state in that, or there's the nostalgia of the heart, you know, and I like the idea that what what you're doing a lot of the time with making music is healing of the heart, you know, and giving people that opportunity to sit down and cry over someone or grieve something or think about how much they love their dog, like whatever it is, right? So there's all of that. So and it's also just in the most fundamental sense, I recognised that my giving people the opportunity to just dance around and to move is like a gift in itself, because that is a form of healing, to dance and move and shake off stress and tension and have that unity experience of dancing to the same thing with other people. And when I look at music traditionally, I feel that it really has a unifying function, you know. I remember once a gig that I did when I was doing acoustic gigs in my sort of early 20s and playing a song, and, you know, aren't I clever, you know, I'm so original and blah, blah. But, you know, nothing captured the attention of people more than the next guy who got up and sang something that everyone was able to sing along with.
Of course.
And I just went, you know, like this is what music is. It's not about, I think, you know, falling into that trap of let's all sit and look at the really clever person. That's cool, you know, and it is transcendent to watch someone do something with, you know, mirror neuron wise, to play incredibly in an instrument or produce a beautiful sound with their voice that just makes your hair stand up. And I say that's the intuitive part. I like the mystery of not being able to explain, you know, and rationalize why we enjoy something, which I think in the rational materialist kind of age we've fallen into needing to justify, you know, why something has worth, if we can sort of show the working out for the answer, you know. And there's beauty in being able to see all those different facets and trust that what we're doing is energetically important. Even if you're just sitting there pumping out your music into your space and you're meditating on that, that's a kind of prayer, that's a kind of invocation that you are channeling through into the world, and that ripples out, even if it's just your meditation, in the same way that some monks sitting in a cave somewhere, you know, doing the mantra for the, you know, may all beings be free, and right it does ripple out. Okay, so think of it like an ocean. Think if I think of the world or the universe like an ocean, I understand that, you know, a whale singing here can be heard hundreds of miles away by another whale, and there's really no distance between people in terms of space and time in that kind of astral ocean world. And things do ripple. So if you start to think of it more, I say esoteric, but it's only because we've separated it into, you know, the visible and invisible world, but they're not. Like I say, it's all a continuum. Then, you can get pretty deeply into what am I channeling here into the world with what I make, and what is my wish for other people, and what am I giving them the opportunity to tune into themselves and to release or to consolidate or to confront, whatever that is. And that ultimately gets down to the whole collective. We're operating as one and we're all trying to help each other.
It's beautiful, beautifully articulated. I'm interested in your thoughts on also something that I come to often when I write.
Mm-hmm.
If I've been struck by a particular idea, like the complete mystery as to where the inspiration comes from, and how mysterious sometimes it can feel when you put like an exact string, something that you've never thought of, you know, that you can't credit to yourself.
Yeah, well, I say to people, I don't write my music, I hear it. And most of my music I hear either falling asleep or waking up. And I quickly grab but yeah, I'm not trying to write anything really. It's all, I just hear it like it's already been written in some dimension, and you're just realizing it again. So that's that sort of.
I
esoteric aspect in a way.
Yeah, I feel like there's my experience, I think, is also that there's a technique or a discipline into being open to that. You know, that in some ways, if you don't have your recorder on hand or you haven't given space for the muse, then, you know, she doesn't show.
If you don't have any new experiences, that's a big one. Like you're talking about since you've had a child and, you know, like, and people get their heart broken. People go to, they go to some festival where they, you know, experience some sort of transcendence, or they get taken out of the comfort zone. Those are the things that I think pull the fabric apart a bit for something to come down or to come up from the subconscious, you know, because you are working on, I'm aware of the fact that subconsciously I'm working on music all the time, you know, because I'll put something away and then a couple of days later I'll come back with the next idea and I wasn't trying to think about it. So, yeah.
The old subconscious.
Yeah, you need catalysts. You need things that stimulate that, and I think that's why that trying to do that 9 to 5 thing, you know, can if there's no variation in that, that's one of the things that kills the creativity. You know, because I've had periods where I've been working 9 to 5 and working really hard and actually generating a lot of music too.
Yes.
So sometimes working really hard with the left brain can actually create this sort of pressure, you know, of what you're not creating, and suddenly that comes through. So, yeah, it depends.
My theory about that, when it comes to workload, I think has a lot to do with just how energized you feel. So I find that I get particularly unproductive if I am doing less. It's a weird thing. So if I clear out my schedule and I'm somehow got tons of free time on my hand, I find that I procrastinate way more, get less done.
Totally.
Than if I have a gig coming up and you know, multiple things to do. I actually find, you know, so if I'm working full time plus, you know, organizing a show, trying to write a record, I'm doing more than if I was doing only one of those things. It's a weird...
Yeah, sometimes you need that pressure, for sure.
And one of the things that I was totally afraid of when, you know, when Annie and I were even just talking about having a kid was just like, Jesus, I'm just never going to have time to do anything.
Yeah, you're going to become this like drained zombie with no creative potential anymore. And
I suppose the big irony of that is I do have heaps less time, but I'm so much more driven to use it effectively.
Conscious of the time you have. I really hear a lot of parents say that.
Yeah. That's
and sometimes they say they're more creative than they were, but they just use the time differently.
Yeah, I would say that 100%. And also one of the most productive things that I have been doing is singing to Grace as I put her to sleep, which is just insane. I've written so much stuff, mostly lullabies, because
you got the impetus to freestyle, and kids do that. Yeah,
definitely. It's really fun. And so the thing that I'm actually looking forward to is I feel like so the next I'm doing this putting this record out at the moment. The next thing that I'm really keen to do is put out these children's songs that I've written, and they're very much for children. They're, as in they're for parents to sing to children. They're not for children to sing, if that makes sense, because they're all lullabies. But the thing that I'm really looking forward to is when Grace is old enough to want silly songs, because then I'll start writing those for her, because she can't speak yet, she can't talk back, she can't sing.
Right.
And so I see like all the Wiggles and all this sort of, like, you get exposed to kids stuff obviously when you've got a kid, and so I just have this. I'm looking forward to these periods coming forward, and eventually she's going to hit the stage where she's like, "Shut up! I don't want to hear any of you singing." And I'm looking forward.
You're
to
not
that
cool anymore.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well, kind of.
I wonder what you're right then.
Oh, yeah, I know. Back to my teenage angstiness, like, oh, I've got a broken heart. She doesn't love me.
Yeah.
It'll be like another.
Yeah, that'll be
cycle.
Good stimulant for that.
Oh dear. Okay, so just to change tack a little bit, I know that you and I both love a good chat on the internet
Mm-hmm.
and a chat about the internet and a bit of a, you know, you're probably more talkative about this stuff online than I am.
Okay.
So, but doesn't necessarily mean that we're not, because I love a good conspiracy theory. I know that you do too. I want to get into some of this esoteric discussion.
Can of worms.
Yeah. Look, I love a can of worms.
Yeah.
There's no need to fear.
Full of protein.
Yeah.
It's the way of the future.
Yeah.
They don't release methane.
So yeah, I want to. They're good. They're so good. They're so good. I think cans of spin, you know, but there's also good things come in cans, you know, cans of whoop ass and spinach. And so let's open up all the cans. And the one of the cans that I opened with a friend of mine recently was discussing with him his favorite conspiracy theory and why.
Ooh.
And so I want to
favorite.
You
have to choose a favorite.
Yeah, well, we'll start talking about one. I'm sure we'll branch out. But could you pick one and for a reason and why? It's just a question.
I think flat Earth really takes the cake.
I love it.
I met an engineer recently at a party who was a flat earther.
Wow.
And I also had a friend who was postgrad psychology qualified clinical psychologist who also got into flat Earth.
Why is it that psychologists are insane?
The wounded healer thing. Definitely.
Such an eloquent and immediate answer.
Yeah, but it's also because I did a psych major, and it definitely the people that make it to the final cut are the rats and stats people who don't necessarily have certain kinds of people skills.
Gotcha.
Sometimes I'm not. That's a generalization, but
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, what that did was, prove to me that it's not the realm of the uneducated tertiary wise, folk that are buying it. And it's fascinating. Thought about releasing a colouring in book where you join the dots and it's a flat Earth or it's a fake moon landing.
That's like
a
conspiracy.
A conspiracy book.
You would make some serious bank doing that, I think.
Yeah.
Both. Oh wait, the camera's gone all skew-if. That's pretty hilarious.
Okay.
Sorry to people who are listening to the audio, but I just need to right the camera.
Right the wrongs.
Oh boy, that's going to be interesting. Is that better? There we go. That looks like it will hold. Apologies. So, yes, the conspiracy theory that I enjoy. So, we were talking flat Earth.
Yeah.
The reason I love flat Earth
Yeah.
is one of the many that I enjoy, is because unlike some conspiracy theories which have a kind of airtight internal logic, flat Earth absolutely doesn't. And I feel like when there's a conspiracy theory that is a wonderful, so the Illuminati, the David Icke style Illuminati, where it's actual lizards.
Yeah, David Icke's gone too far with that. He's gone too literal.
But I love it because the internal structure and logic of it is flawless. Because if there was indeed reptilian shapeshifters in a cabal at the highest echelons of society, they would do everything they can to hide themselves. And so it's like a perfect circle. So the lack of evidence for it is a strength. Whereas the idea of if you take like ordinary human motivations and incentives, they can't work for everybody keeping a flat Earth a secret. Like every airline.
The intentionality. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no. I mean, every airline, every astronaut, every geologist, like big geology, like. I don't know, big gravity. Who's benefiting, and why is it that is every other planet flat as well? Is it flat Mars? Is it flat Moon? Or is it just us?
No, it's just us as flat apparently.
Which is that, and that's delicious because if you were the moon, like being the same face towards us all the time.
And the moon's fake, don't you know?
Doesn't seem to be used. Is it utilised by flat? I guess I haven't.
It is. No. The moon's fake. I mean, there are different factions within flat Earth, but basically when you go to the furthest extreme, it's that this is a big terrarium where everything's faked. The sun is a big lamp. The moon, it's a projection. Truman Show style, seriously.
Fantastic. Because does this plug into are flat Earth theorists? Because you're obviously closer to this. You're witnessing the conversations.
I delve.
I feel like I've excised it a little bit too much from my life because I do relish it, but I don't visit. So
keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That's my motto.
So I have this the kind of like vicarious enjoyment because I definitely enjoy. I enjoy the discussion and I enjoy discovering new ones. So my drummer. The late drummer of Spectacles.
Right.
I was trying to remember the name of my old band.
Phil Collins.
Came with a discussion about a new conspiracy theory. He'd been doing research and he was looking at a photo that was taken of the Grand Canyon on our fridge. And he saw that, if you look at the photo of a Grand Canyon, it has like a flat horizon line and then the canyon itself is completely excavated. And he was saying, see, like how, isn't that interesting how like the horizon's really flat and it looks like all of the like canyon has been excavated. And I was like, what do you mean by excavated? He's like, yeah. So he introduced me to the idea that aliens have been mining massive chunks of the earth and a lot of geological features are evidence that they've been heavily mined by massive alien like industry somehow. And so the big pillars in Utah, like those big pillars in Utah that are straight and have a top horizon, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I believe a lot of that stuff originated from a guy who did a really crappy translation of some Assyrian Babylonian stuff and came up with this whole Anunnaki thing. And that started the whole alien races mining the earth thing. And it's actually that he just did a really crappy white man interpretation of this Assyrian stuff that is pretty insulting to Assyrian understanding of Assyrian culture. But I mean, once those things take off, I think one of the things that I talk about with we live in the post 9/11 WMD world, right, where we know that it's come out in various ways for forms of transparency that there are big secret projects going down and lots of lies and lots of manipulation, lots of media complicity, blah, blah, blah. And I think what that then has created is a sort of a mainstream of people who identify with certain beliefs about events and then a sort of alternative pocket that go with the alternative narrative. Now, this is the thing, is that a lot of the time those alternative narratives are damn true.
Yeah, totally.
So what you've got then is you've got room in that space for things like flat Earth and Michelle Obama is really a man. That's what. Have you heard about that one?
No, that's
there's
amazing.
A whole bloody thing like
fantastic.
Photos of her. Look, she's muscly or
she's muscular. Oh, that's wonderful.
It's like
that's delicious.
Yeah,
I see. I take your point. See
they get thrown together with the same community and identity of we are the alternative, we are subversive, and we are hip to the fact that we've been lied to about these other things. So that then just creates room to glue on there.
It gives you. So this is, but see, my position on conspiracy, sort of like the more far out conspiracy theories is why would you bother with really, really wild stuff like Michelle Obama being a man? That's amazing, by the way. I love it. When in terms of conspiracies, there's conspiracies which are like secretive and there's just
there are conspiracies that are out in the freaking open.
So there's just
right now in terms of the way our own government is operating and getting away with it.
Yeah.
In terms of the corruption, and the thing that pisses me off about these sorts of flat Earth kinds of things, and chemtrails is one I've spent time on too, is that it's Don Quixote fighting windmills.
Yeah.
It's immobilizing the troops. It's kind of like giving a whole bunch of LSD to your soldiers and having them drop their guns and roll around on the ground laughing and pointing at trees.
Well, which was an actual...
Was an actual experiment. No, I know this is the one I'm talking about. And that really made me kind of go, when I look at so much of the sort of new age psychedelic kind of stuff, and that's a whole sort of like just focus on yourself, change yourself, and you'll change the world kind of thing if you just meditate enough. And or I really see like an insidious kind of immobilization of the troops where all these things direct people away from activism on the real issues. So while they're all sort of, climate change is a hoax, and and the bushfires were caused by directed energy weapons. And
bushfires caused by directed energy weapons is wonderful. Or it's for high speed rail, or that vaccines are complete poison and mind control.
Yeah, and look, vaccines have side effects, but the thing is that people attribute a level of intentionality that isn't they don't understand human incompetence and error. But at the same time, you see, we've seen, particularly through the 20th century and the ability of technology and media, permanent media, to where things are written down and researchable in a big way, for us to really understand just what sort of evil people are capable of.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like nothing is too far-fetched.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, when you look at things that are actual 100% proven, you've got MK Ultra, and these things you can go down like a massive rabbit hole.
MK Ultra was done, and
it's a thing. It's so you have actual, and just legitimate other conspiracies like the Bay of Pigs, for example, which is a historical event. It was fully a conspiracy. It was an atrocious occurrence for all involved.
Sure.
And that's just an old school conspiracy.
Yeah, you've got all the deep state Mossad stuff, right? That is, so it frustrates me that people are directing their attention and their energy and their efforts, their conversations towards things that are just wastes of time. Because even if the Earth was flat, what freaking difference does it make? Well, people are still starving. We've still got a climate problem. No, wait a minute. No, we don't. That's it's a hoax. People studied for 7 years to become climatologists to begin a comedic career in this elaborate practical joke that it's going to be hilarious in hindsight. I love
the idea. I love the idea that the incentives for climatologists are stronger than for like oil companies. I love that.
The average climatologist earns, I think, something like $87,000 a year. It's like a 4-year undergrad and then a 3-year postgrad just to begin a career in climatology for, for that sort of money.
That's big money.
Big money, yeah.
Big money if you're on the internet.
Yeah, and then of course there's this the undermining argument that's used that if anyone's trying to make money off the transition to a green economy, then that's also proof. It's like, people should operate for free, or labour should be free, and people's time should be free, or it's proof of a sinister conspiracy. The other one I like is, why don't you stop using your phones and why don't you go back to burning horses and carts and stuff? Well, I say, well, why don't you move to a country where there is no environmental regulations and choke? If you don't like environmental regulations.
Yeah, go to Delhi.
Yeah, why don't you give back your livable wage and your weekend that unions and the left earned for you, and your public hospitals and schools, which are all socialist? Why don't you give those back, mate?
Yeah, go somewhere truly libertarian like Liberia. It's right in the name.
Yeah.
Go for it. Anyway, this
Libertaria.
I'm enjoying the intensity. This is good. There's like a lot of channeling happening, a lot of channeling outward of frustration, because I'm so with you. But when you talk about sort of ideologies and concepts that are dead ends.
Yeah, working backwards from a foregone conclusion where you can make everything fit.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of the things that I've been coming across is, I don't know if flat earthers or really anyone can work this ideology into their system, but it's like the simulation argument. Have you heard this one? So there's a very smart
Which one?
Oh, which one?
There are a few.
Yeah. So Nick Bostrom's one specifically. So Nick Bostrom's a very, very, very smart guy.
Right.
And the argument, just to do it in, I'm not going to fully do it justice, but the effective recap of it is simply this, that in the future, our technology will be so advanced and computing power will be so incredibly powerful and cheap that as research, our distant forebears will be running shitloads of simulations about their ancestors. And that if you just compute the likelihood that we're in the original reality or one of these simulations, then it's just overwhelmingly likely that we're in a simulation, just based on that. So if you take those two assumptions, that computing
Well,
power
why not kill
increases.
yourself and get out of the simulation? Why don't you put an end to that?
The reason that I love it metaphysically is that it effectively replaces because this
It's
is
nihilism.
it's nihilistic. It's also it's deistic. It replaces our reality with gods who are distant relatives of ourselves, but completely devoid of any teachings or actual like.
And is that not the ultimate first world privilege, to sit around and wonder if you're in a simulation because you're not battling for your survival?
Yeah, wondering whether this is the authentic reality.
What a lucky guy you are to have that as your quandary.
Yes,
in life. Well, all those other people who are, trying to survive the non-negotiable parameters of the simulation, like starvation and war zones.
One of the other fun bits about simulation theory is how it essentially it's how dehumanizing it is as well.
Yeah.
Is that because it's none of it's real, like nothing's real, then suffering doesn't matter, or like actual compassion is unnecessary because.
So why not go on a killing spree if it's a simulation? You know what I mean? Why not?
Well, don't give them ideas.
Well, okay, all right.
But I'm just these while we're talking about some of the more far out and I guess frustrating, because I hear smart people explore philosophical nonsense like the simulation argument. And I get frustrated because it feels like it seems like very few people are taught critical thinking. And then the second thing is, it seems like anybody who proposes a grand unifying something is automatically an advantage to try and get people's
because
attention.
People think the truth is simple. They think if something sounds simplistic, then it must be the truth. But the truth is actually always very complicated.
I couldn't agree more.
It's a deception. But it's not real problem solving. Do you know what I mean? Like even if we did figure out we were in a simulation or not in a simulation, like what is that doing in the present moment in terms of bettering the circumstances? Like, what if, let's entertain, because I like to subvert some of these things, like let's entertain the idea that they're testing out whether or not we will use our free will to improve the world in this simulation, and they're running a whole bunch of versions of that. Well, you're failing that one if you're just sitting there, not.
But there's also a burgeoning idea that gets talked about all the time, that free will isn't actually real, which I adore as well as a kind of idea. I wish I could just laugh at and discard like flat earth, but there are smart people who honestly claim that they believe that free will is an illusion. And it's an incredibly frustrating mess because, as you say, even if it was, is it a helpful idea?
Well, I can give you an anecdote as to why what for me was sort of the clincher in that we do have free will.
Please do.
So, you may or may not know that I did a lot of work as a clairvoyant.
No.
In my time.
Wow. This is new information for me.
So I'm a precog. So I will see things before they happen, dream things before they happen.
Have you been put in a tank to be, to do?
No, I have to go out and work a job. It's really annoying. I want to float in a tank.
Minority report now.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, okay.
No, the most I can get is maybe the salt tank at a wellbeing centre for an hour.
Oh, damn.
So I had this dream years ago because I lived in Scotland for a while. And before I went to Scotland, I had this dream that I was walking around at this festival with my boyfriend at the time. And then the festival had like there was like a castle with graffiti on it, like rainbow looking graffiti, and there was a sequence of events in the dream where I ended up being upset at the end of it. And I was with a mutual friend of ours in the dream also. When I arrived at Scotland a few months later, the boyfriend said he was going to this festival, and there was a question of whether or not I would come. And I found out that the mutual friend was going to this festival. I asked her afterwards. I remember looking at the website and seeing this castle with the
graffiti,
with the rainbow graffiti on the side. It's actually called Kelburn Castle, I believe, in Scotland. And it is a festival. So I was like, oh, whoa. Right? Now, in the dream, the sort of plot that played out was I got there, hung out with him, he went off with someone else, or something upsetting happened, and I was kind of left on my own at the end of the dream with the mutual friend. And when I did get to Scotland, I did find out that he had just started seeing, because it was a long distance thing, he'd just taken up with another woman. So this was the story that was going to play out. And previously, I'd always had this thing where, and it was a big mistake that I used to make, where I thought, if I see something ahead of time, I must choose that thing because it must be some sort of destiny or lesson that I'm supposed to learn or something. And I decided that it was almost like some part of me on some quantum level had lived that experience and had been able to communicate it. And this is where we're getting into, like, you know, time as quite a simultaneous kind of concept, right?
Yeah, let's get it.
Where it's like more like layers of an onion next to each other rather than
So
points ahead and behind.
It's a loaf. Anyway,
yeah.
We'll get
So I chose not to go to the festival. I realised that I had this information ahead of time and that I was going to just feel shit at the end of it. So I chose not to go. And I remember the weekend that and of course he did end up going, and, you know, and I remember the weekend that I would have been at the festival if I hadn't had that dream. And I was hanging out with a couple of other people, and I remember having this real feeling of having, like, really outsmarted the Matrix. You know what I mean? And it was like, what was this alternative universe that I was in now because I had chosen something else? And I understood that was my free will. That was me using my free will.
Eschewing a dream. Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually premonitions, because people say, well, why don't you win the lottery if you can see? Well, I don't usually choose what information I get, right? But the classic example is the mum who dreamt of the chandelier falling on the baby at a certain time, and then went in and it was that time, and she took the baby out, and the chandelier did fall, and she would have this recurrent dream. Is that premonitions function to protect you from danger? They have a survival function. They're not, you know, winning the lottery isn't, you know.
They don't have an abundance.
Right. But then the question is, well, what kind of danger was it for me to, you know, go to some festival and have a bad time? It's not really a threat to my survival. So it seemed like maybe there's a whole spectrum of, you know, you choosing, right? So you might have a good feeling about something in the future or right? But you might also have a bad feeling about it, and you can't rationalize why. So if you actually use that information that you get, that's you exercising your free will. You know, but you have to use intuition. But you also use, you know, you use rational information as well, like you know, overt sorts of knowledge and learning, and that is an exercise in free will. However, people are animals that are very much compelled by instincts and driven by their traumas and their conditioning
and incentives. Yes, I mean, I think you can recognize that free will has limitations without completely annihilating the entire concept, and therefore also the real issue with advocating the idea that there's no such thing as free will, or that it's, you know, it's far less powerful than we think, is that I can't think of anything more destabilizing. We were talking about ideas that destabilize people who might otherwise be free-thinking activists into, like, just going into whirlpools and vortexes of distraction and
like a wasp in a jar,
and
or becoming really resigned and just choosing stress management. Narratives.
And I can't think of anything that would be more enervating to society than the idea that everything's preordained and that all your choices are not your choices, and that
It's
you
a total
don't have
undermining of human sovereignty.
yes, and creativity and beauty and all the things that we love. Anyway, so
And that in itself, that is more like a David Icke reptile conspiracy,
well,
where those sorts of ideas are turning us away from empowerment.
well, this is the point at which it would be delicious to say out loud. Sam Harris, who is the biggest proponent of this idea that free will isn't true, let's just say that he's like, so Sam, no, I don't think that you're a reptile, but advocating free will doesn't exist makes you very reptilian.
Yeah, I mean, David Icke doing all that fear mongering is working for the reptilians too, isn't he?
Well, that's
Don't
right.
they feed on fear? Isn't he whipping up a lot of that?
Well, no, he loves it, and I think it's an amazing career. And also, it's something which is, I feel like if you don't have some kind of connection with divinity, and all you've done is read David Icke, then at least it fills some kind of like spiritual narrative for the world and your place.
Right, because we've rejected all of the old heritage of humanity where we understood that there was a big interdimensional ecosystem where some things were friendly and some things weren't. Right? And some things want to predate on you the way a mosquito does and use your energy for itself the way you might use the energy of a plant or an animal. And is that sinister? Right? Is a mosquito then evil? Well, so what if there is what if there is a reptilian looking thing to us, right? That there's certainly lots of different ways of looking at that, okay?
Yeah.
So, but we've closed the door on the idea because we're all rational materialists now.
Yeah.
That there is an interdimensional ecosystem and some things are human friendly and some things aren't, in the same way that if you're walking out there in the street, there are some animals that you need to be worried about in terms of their effect on you and others that might be good for you
or
and
benign,
etc. Right. So if you can expand your view on that, but it doesn't have to be like a categorically good and evil universe, right? Like if you're the lion, if you're a gazelle, the lion is evil because it wants to eat you, you know. But we look at lions and we're like, oh, isn't it cute, and little lion cub eating a steak or something. We don't look at that and go, that's evil because it predates, right?
Yeah. Well.
So this is a problem with categorizing predators.
I think that would also, the reason that I think we humans relate to predators more is because we're predatory as fuck. I mean,
and we're prey too. We've been preyed on by lots of things.
Of course, but we're team mammal and we're team predator, team omnivore, because we would prefer to relate. Like nobody in history. There's no Disney film called The Gazelle King, right? Can you imagine? It's not a thing. Like the
majesty and power.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
sovereignty.
So humans, we don't want to associate with prey, despite the fact that we are probably the most vulnerable biped. Well, one of the only bipeds.
Yeah.
If you look at other simians, holy shit, we are like mincemeat. Chimpanzees are like 9 times stronger than us, or so. I don't know what that's. I'm just making up numbers.
No, we are very fragile, especially since we became bipedal and all the sort of dying in childbirth kind of stuff.
But the idea of sort of like strength and fitness and trying to prevail against
is
nature
great as long as we're using it.
Yes.
On the other threats, but not if it's being used against us.
Well, but this is one of the great ironies about things like conservationism, for example. A lot of people think that it's despicable that communities in India kill tigers, which still kill people in remote parts. And it's obviously a tragedy. Nobody wants an endangered species to go extinct.
Yeah.
But if that was your children that were at risk of being eaten,
Yeah.
I mean, I look at some of the insane coincidences when it comes to companies that are selling solutions to destroy animals. And I feel like one of the things that I like to think about when you think about time dilation and time being a loaf, right? I like to think about future archaeologists unearthing our society and being like, what the fuck were these people doing? How did they pray in these giant steel towers? What were they doing? Like, so what are the rituals? And it's like, their rituals really really shit. They're like sitting around just staring into a glowing rectangle for they'll be trying to reconstruct what we were doing. Be like, what does this have to do with finding God? It's like, we're going to be the first society ever where our largest buildings are not religious, and it's going to be really weird for future archaeologists. Anyway, so there's that thought that I constantly have, and the other thought that I often have is how sickening and bizarre some of the I feel like the insect liberation movement hasn't happened yet. So we've had I'm basically vegan these days. My wife's a vegan. It's a huge growing movement. It's wonderful. I think compassion is an excellent concept, and yet insects aren't invited to the party yet. Nobody, I'm starting to see a couple of articles concerned about insects, like a huge insect apocalypse that's been happening. But still, you can turn on the TV right now and there will be an ad for a Bayer device sold by Bayer of the literal inventions, the inventors of Zyklon B. And you put a little automatic sprayer in your home, or like on your patio, that will automatically spray gas.
A holocaust.
Yeah. But we're talking about like an insect holocaust. And Bayer, like it's really funny. They went from gas chambering people to, hey, guess what?
They're downsized.
We're just, you know what? Like, we know how to gas things, all right? Trust us. We turn down the volume.
We've improved our ethical practices. Yeah, we got a team onto it.
Yeah. And so, but you inviting these skills and like, this is like a legacy of poison that is now commercialized and is being distributed like it's totally normal. That the idea that this is not insanely freaky is firstly that these companies are still around, still using their original names is so wild. Like Hugo Boss is still Hugo Boss. Bayer is still Bayer.
The Liberal National Party, still that.
Yeah, that's right. IBM is still IBM. These are companies that actively participated in war crimes, like dressing like an army that committed genocide, or building literal gas chambers, or helping the Nazis process the information.
What you're getting at is the core issue of people just want to be comfortable in the present.
Yeah,
and with your buildings, we used to have God to take care of us, and now we figured out a few other things, and we have, now money takes care of us.
Well, God is dead. Nietzsche said God is dead. And when he was writing that in Thus Spake Zarathustra, like the idea wasn't...
That construct is dead.
Yeah, well, but what he was saying is not like some kind of nihilistic celebration, like, yay. It was more like, oh, shit. We need to come up with something to, like, replace this incredibly beautiful idea that sits at the center of our culture.
And a lot of our art, you look at something like American Psycho, it is... fairly immediately in the 20th century, people started to get onto challenging and questioning what we've done since we've killed God, in terms of becoming materialists who are into convenience and status and
hollowness.
But we also have the legal system now, though. That's the thing. We have forensics. Like back in the day, if you killed someone, God was going to punish you. Like that was where you got that comfort about people doing the wrong thing. And now we have a whole system that holds people accountable, so we don't need to take comfort in the idea that they're gonna, God's gonna punish them, unless I do think a lot of the constructs that are that religion provides are about comfort, about the mercy of pain and stress relief in a world that is very carnivorous and brutal.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean, right, that we've travelled through all the dimensions of the universe and we've looked through all the corners and we've proven there's no God there, and well, it's not Charlton Heston Jehovah God, so
well, yeah, this is I'm glad we're getting because we've talked about like all the bad ideas,
right? And
one of the ideas that I'm really keen to hear from you is articulating your philosophy. Like, what do you think, what are the ideas about what's at the core of reality at your core? See, because when you were saying it's not the Jehovah God, like we haven't looked in every corner of the universe, one of the most fundamental problems that I have with the whole discussion of like the existence of God is that I come from a debating background. I debated all the time in high school. I was really good at it. I was a masterful debater. Anyway, I was a master debater. Anyway.
He said it.
Yeah. It's the only joke about debating. Anyway, you got to say it. So one of the things that really shits me is when you have an argument or a debate about something without defining your terms. And if anyone stands on a stage or behind a podium and talks about does God exist, they never talk about what does God mean, and they never talk about what does existence mean.
Right. Right. So there's God as like Pharaoh, daddy, provider, father, who's going to whoop the ass of your tribe and protect our tribe, right? But then there's like the cosmically diffuse concept of God, like the architecture of matter and right. And then there's God as the creator or the creative force that seems to very much like to create itself. If you look at the way life, all the organisms seem to be really trying to stay alive and outwit their environment, right? Their life sure seems to love living. Yeah. Right? So there's that creative force, and you can look at that as the love that is the God force, right? Trying to stay alive in the darkness and keep consciousness and intelligence and compassion going, or competition, right? Because it's not necessarily, God's not necessarily nice, right?
Yeah. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not a winner. It's not everybody wins.
Yeah, that's right. Even though you want it to be you, just, going back to that whole sort of lion and gazelle sort of analogy, right?
Yeah.
But there's the sort of God as the creation itself or the creator, and then there's God as a post-human, most evolved consciousness kind of form that maybe is even beyond, right? Yeah. This creation, and you're sort of getting into some of those Gnostic ideas that, this world is kind of like ruled by a more sort of evil archon sort of force. And then God is a sort of higher consciousness that you try and make contact with to help you out of this world, right? Yeah. In the same way that you might be trying to evolve your consciousness as something with, as a frog. A frog can't comprehend you and your level of consciousness because it's pretty post-frog. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But is it fair to say that you've got more of an evolved awareness, consciousness, compassion, intelligence than the frog? Well, that's a question, because intuitively you'd say yes. But I'd also say, but if you can't breathe underwater though, can you? Do you know what I mean? Like, there are things that the animals are doing, like, well, you can't fly, you can't, right? So,
and there's also
what does it mean to be evolved?
Well, also, I feel like if you are behaving benevolently, you might be able to say that you are. If you're reading books and you're being kind and you're writing songs. But if you're torturing animals, it's like, well, frogs don't do that. Like they like eat flies for food, but they don't torture kittens or quokkas or whatever for fun, which is why I think that's, we have such a visceral response about the despicability of certain acts of cruelty.
Yes.
Which are just so undeniably evil because they're beyond the animalistic.
But even though those psychopathic traits are useful in other contexts, and actually promote survival and benevolence in other contexts, so that's the doozy. But
you want the psychopaths next to you in the foxhole in World War III for sure.
Right, exactly. Like the diversity of states, so that you can meet all the challenges thrown at you. Right.
Yeah.
But getting back to your sort of definitional thing, I'm very much with you on that. And one of the things I like to say is, try telling a dog it's Thursday. I mean, there are things that are just, they're not, the arrogance of us thinking that, we've got God, what God is or isn't pinned down is hilarious. The stories absolutely. That we must be just inventing and telling ourselves to make sense.
Just to get back to, because the thing I like to do is work backwards. All right, so does God exist is if that's something that we're sitting on a stage and going to have a discussion about or an argument about, let's begin with existence. Let's try and talk about what that is and what that means. Because if you define existence in a particular way, then the argument it like resolves itself instantly.
Well, flip it. Is existence God?
That's wait.
Okay, too far.
Yeah.
Sorry, man.
Wait. Let's get there. But the thing about existence is that we discuss things as if they exist that completely don't. So, for example, let's say economics.
Okay.
You would say, like, does economics exist? And be like, well, of course it does. There's buildings, and it's like, but where the fuck is it? You know, like, you can't point to any bit and say, well, you could give it another name, or you could explain it, be like, well, is this economics? Well, it's like these people are like trading and they're supply and demand. It's like, well, that's finance. Or you could give it another name. You say it's like, it's just a competitive expression of our biology. Like, you could express it in biological terms.
Right. It's all just quite enhanced linguistic concepts around what monkeys are or aren't doing to each other.
Exactly. And yet nobody is like an economics denialist, right? Do you know what I mean? Like,
I tried to take economics in year 11. I was like, so this doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
and he'd be like, yeah, no, you just got to suspend that problem with it not making sense and just go along with it. And
no, of course. No. Well, and there's massive criticisms, but you see, nobody denies it exists as a concept. And the thing is, if that's all that existence is, which is a concept existing in a brain,
a vocabulary.
Yeah, a concept and a vocabulary, because when economists think about the economy, they use certain terms and they use certain numbers and they use certain equations, and it's like that's what defines what being an economist is or what economics is. But if you if you just use that same concept of like, okay, well, there's billions of minds on the planet and they all think about something when they hear the word God, and it's a set of concepts and stories and beliefs and structures mentally. So does that has the same existence as economics, but nobody says economics doesn't exist. Like, and so but then you have to say, okay, well, that's obviously not what we mean by existence. You mean like a certain more, you mean like a certain more objective existence, right? But it's like, but what's so interesting is that a lot of people who believe in God don't make any claims about anything that's objective or like physical or real that you can pin down to with evidence. So it's like,
however, though, it's good to be aware that in amongst all of this sort of, theoretical stuff that can you make a cell?
No, of course not. Yeah.
Right. Do you know what I mean? Like we've placed ourselves up here. We think that we're up here in the way we're, getting to the bottom of it, and we're so smart with it. But we're not thinking about any of the processes that are going on right now in terms of our conception, our heart beating, our thermoregulation, like that. That this is one part of our brain that is engaging in this analysis, and on the physical level, we can't reproduce anything that we see as being,
But we love to try, and in fact, like there was so I think it was 2013 or something. It was quite like not too long ago that they've made artificial cells. Like there was a guy came out and was like, we did it. And it's like, this is the moment.
You're fired, God.
Well, this is another interesting idea, which is that we are supplanting like literal godlike powers with technology, and that one of my favorite theories is, again, this is just a lovely thought experiment that I'd like to share with you and see what you think, is if we get to the point where we create AI and that AI is, necessarily has the super intelligence to like solve massive science problems and create free energy. You've got free energy manipulating matter at will. You've got like Star Trek replicator technology. Effectively, you can harvest energy at will from suns, go around, create Dyson spheres. So you have an intelligence that's like flying around galaxies, can maybe solve speed of light travel, can do energy production at will. The only thing for this being that is going to be a challenge to its existence, and if you take that thing that you just said earlier, which is that life really does like to promulgate itself.
Sure does.
If you comport to this artificial intelligence merely the desire to continue propagating itself, once you get to a certain point of being existing in the universe for millennia, billions of years, the greatest threat to its survival will be the heat death of the universe itself.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, the only thing it would be incentivized to do would be create more universes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a fun thing to think about, like the cyclical nature of like if you're a lot of philosophy stems from this idea of like, well, God gets bored. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you're an infinite, all-powerful being. If you're both omnipotent, if you're omnipotent, you're all-knowing.
Just having a slow day at the office.
Yeah. So if you're omnipotent and omnipresent, you know everything, you're everywhere, and you're all-powerful. You're omnipotent, omnipresent. Then you get.
Do you know everything though? What if God is developing as this whole project goes along? What if there's one way of, looking at it as God trying to develop its merciful side by having suffering in the world. There are all these sorts of ideas where God is not a finished business at all.
But this comes back to the idea, I think it's in the Upanishads, where God gets bored and shatters itself, himself, herself, into all of the like different fragments of consciousness that encounter each other in our world. So it's like it forgets that it's God, and then it walks around playing peekaboo. And these are some of the ideas.
It's sort of like cool story, bro. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like they're very much human projections of bored and this and that, like things gaps that we can't fill in with our own experience.
So I've just articulated some of my favorite pet thought experiments. What's going on? What's going on with you?
Well, one of your thought experiments reminds me of one of my thought experiments.
Wonderful.
Which was, I remember staring out the kitchen window one day and suddenly having this idea that the Earth exists in an environment. Well, you look at everything on the Earth; it exists in an environment and in an environment, and it has to develop. It has mutations that then are either advantageous or not, right, in terms of it surviving, and based on really what those threats are. And when you look at what are the threats to the Earth, if you zoom out, it's the sun swallowing it, and it's asteroids. And I had this thought that what if we are like the immune cells of the Earth, the immune system that is developing all this intelligence through trial and error and all the suffering and industrialization and mistakes and climate change, and having to come to understand all the elements of planetary survival, terraforming, etc., developing this technology so that one day we've just developed the lasers that are powerful enough to destroy that freaking asteroid that comes, right? and then possibly even get off the Earth and take the life that's on Earth, like a yogurt culture starter, and take it somewhere else and keep the life on Earth going, because life on Earth really does seem to like to keep going. And I don't know, I just thought that was a pretty interesting
I dig it.
pretty interesting idea that seems compatible in that as above, so below sense when you look at organisms on Earth and you look at the way our own immune system functions.
Yeah, with countless, billions of bacteria that are patrolling us in some kind of beautiful symbiosis. Realizing
some
that
of them are good and some of them are bad.
Yeah, and you got to keep them in balance. You got to eat the right stuff to keep them.
Figure out which ones are bad and then destroy them all.
Yeah,
and there will be no cane toad-like side effects.
Well, the thing that I think that has beautiful echoes of is like the brutality of survival that we've come up with to defeat something like cancer. Which is
that's what I'm saying.
Which
exactly.
is like a massive.
There's an ecosystem that we don't fully understand, and we think you can just remove one thing that predates on us or we don't like, and then the insects, kill all the insects with Cyclone B or whatever, and then wait a minute, turns out that's the cane toad problem.
Yeah, yeah. So it's or like the latest thing that I heard, mosquito wise, is they're making sterile mosquitoes, and they release sterile mosquitoes into the population, and so they mate with the females and they don't have babies.
Okay.
And then no more mosquitoes. Anyway.
And wouldn't the mosquitoes see that as the most incredibly evil plan
that's
of an alien race?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe we're just a pest to something else.
Oh no, we are I think about insects all the time. When I was on acid, came to this realization that...
Well, that's an insult to insects, isn't it? You should be thinking about them, in moments of sobriety too.
Oh, no,
Dave.
I do as well. Clearly, I've come up with this insect liberation movement, which I'm yet to sort of coalesce into a book.
I don't know.
I want to be the Peter Singer of insects. No, I don't actually. No, I find them creepy.
I love insects. They're incredible. I mean, they're the
most.
When we talk about aliens, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think
I'm a big fan of bees. There's a hierarchy though. Bees.
Yeah, bees are the bomb.
Yeah, bees are awesome.
Yeah,
and I think they're just like they're at the top of the
what
top
about
of the
ants?
tree.
I love ants.
I love ants. I hate them when they're on me and they're biting me. I got bitten by an ant just recently. He meant business.
It's such a betrayal because you're like, I'm such a fan of you and your style and your whole intelligence, and you're hurting me.
But really, ants are more like cells. You know, like they're not. I don't feel that bad about killing an ant. I feel like because that's
the whole Borg kind of thing.
Yeah, well, like I feel like if you kill the queen and you destroy a colony, that's real bad. But if you just kill one ant, particularly if he's biting you,
and here's the interesting question, because you were talking before about, you know, vegans haven't included the insects. I would say, well, the mammalian experience of suffering, right? Kind of mammalian up is kind of an intensity of suffering, right? That it's reasonable to postulate that insects and plants are not having the same depth and breadth and complexity of suffering. However, there's also the question of what it means for us to eradicate insects in terms of our own survival.
Yes, 100%.
And thinking of it from that point of view.
Just the symbiosis nature, like the idea that the reason, I mean, so bees are the bomb. Not only are they you know, hyper complex in terms of their social behavior, much like ants, but they're cute. They're cute and they're cool and they fly. You know, they fly and they pollinate things. They're they're just, you know, beautifully integrated into the entire
life
universe of propagation and plants.
Yeah.
But the other insects don't feel like that in the same way, which is why I think we have more of an affinity for bees and even ants than something like cockroaches. But I'm fully with you. I think that understanding how everything is integrated is something.
And this is where I see a lot of climate change and eyes fall down, where they don't understand ecology, because I go, well, the Earth's climate's always changed. And, you know, carbon was higher at other points. Yes, but the whole ecosystem that was around then, you know, was adapted, was surviving in that range of parameters in terms of carbon, in terms of temperature, everything.
And the change and the changes that were happening millennia ago in, say, like the Carboniferous era and other times were happening over millennia, not happening within
rapidly
one human generation.
Right. And explaining to people that once things move, because they're thinking those absolute terms of the level of carbon, but explaining to them that once things move too quickly outside of the parameters, you know, of survival for certain species, and you knock one species out of the equation, whatever, that then you've got a problem. Then you've got a whole system collapse, because they're not thinking in terms of, you don't step in the same river twice when it comes to the Earth's ecological history. You know, there's things you can deduce, but at each point it was very, you know, it was about what was a snapshot of what was there at the time. And now you have, you know, nearly 8 billion people who rely on certain parameters that we've become reliant on to survive, where our rain falls, you know, where our food grows,
what floods
and what doesn't, and what species we survive on.
Yep.
And it's almost like they don't understand the change part. You know what I mean? And how change is a threat potentially, and how that is problematic for you when the environment changes, because you can't then navigate things in the same way, or your whole infrastructure is challenged.
And just the concept of sustainability, I think, is also a huge problem. You know, above and beyond the levels of carbon, we're just talking about levels of consumption in the West that were they to be exported. And this is the great hilarity about people who oppose climate change within the West saying, I don't want to change my lifestyle. and have a lower standard of living.
No one does.
Yeah, of course. But what's so insane is that we have all the televisions and the phones and the culture, and we're broadcasting it to billions of people that don't have our lifestyle. And if they all race towards having all of the mod cons of modern life in Australia and the US and the UK and all the first world parts of the world, then firstly, I would never blame them. But incontrovertibly, if everybody on the planet adopted a Western lifestyle, the resources would consume planet Earth many times over. And so it's a growing realization that by necessity, if you have compassion for other people and you wish them to have all of the power that we now enjoy, like right now, where this is insane technology, we're talking on wireless microphones, is being broadcast live onto the internet. This is truly, it's like wasn't possible 10 years ago. And it's truly extraordinary. Now, I remember visiting a place in Cambodia, a beautiful place called Don Det, which is an island on the Mekong. It's not in Cambodia, it's in Laos. It's like right on the border with Cambodia though. So bottom of Laos, and you can only get there by boat, and there's no electricity on the island. And I remember, it's a beautiful place to be. It's just remarkably calm and cool, and, all of the beautiful things you can imagine about riverside islands, majestic sunsets, like beautiful fields.
Isn't it amazing how at this time for us in Australia, cool and watery just sounds like the most salivating kind of paradise you've ever imagined, because we're just burnt and dry and rainless.
Well, luckily it has been raining in Sydney at least, which is beautiful. So anyway, so I'm in this place and it's paradisic. And as we're leaving,
was it fully paradisic?
It was pretty paradisic.
Okay, yep.
So as we're leaving, I remember talking to on the boat going away. Oh yeah, there's like a couple of places you could use electricity. So there was like an internet cafe that ran on a car battery, which is hilarious, but otherwise basically nothing. And then I remember, pardon me, looking at a little family, for example, sleeping out under the stars and being like, wow, that's so nice. But then realizing, okay, there's mosquitoes.
They're probably getting it in life. Yeah.
Yeah. There's mosquitoes. That's probably not ideal.
Yeah.
And then
that's the whole noble savage
on the way
thing.
out. So we in our cabin, like, obviously didn't have air conditioning or anything, but we had a mosquito net, and we had, it was like we were at least somewhat protected. Now, I think there were, where we stayed, they also had a generator, and so you could run aircon briefly, like at certain points, which was amazing. Anyway, so as we were leaving, I was talking to this Irish journalist. So she's from Ireland. We're from Australia. Again, just the fact that we can travel to this remote place of the world is amazing. And then as we're leaving, she says to me, "Oh, I hear that they're going to get electricity in a couple of years. That's such a shame." And I said to her, "Are you kidding? Like, imagine if you lived there. That would be like not having refrigeration, air conditioning, fans."
Right. This is the thing, is that the further you go into getting more comfortable, the harder it gets to imagine your life even taking away one of those things. Like if I say, let's take away your air con, okay, well, let's take away your fan. And, you've become more and more comfortable. I mean, we live like kings in a way that no one in history ever has. Look at what we can eat of a day.
Insane.
People didn't eat like that in their lifetime, right? And so do you know the loss aversion experiments with monkeys?
Absolutely.
Yep. So we have a problem with perceiving that we're going down in our resources. Or social status. We get stressed by that. We always want to be either at the same level. It's like you don't want to see your bank account drop, even though $5,000 in your bank account when you were 18 would have been riches, right?
Yeah.
But then when you're older, that was nothing, right? So it's like we're always looking to accumulate, and I think there is something to the idea that there are cultural as well differences with that. Like, I have my own theory that Northern Europeans, possibly Eurasians as well, people who had to survive winters had to be into hoarding.
Yeah.
They had to be into thinking ahead and having a lot of stuff. Whereas if you live somewhere like the Amazon, having stuff, it'll just get moldy. It's a liability. So materialism is it's geographically different, dependent to some extent. And so, we descend from people who are damn good at hoarding and thinking ahead through the winters. We have all this stuff, and if I have stuff that I live with now that I think, my life I don't want to lose that thing. It's kind of like, it's a good shampoo that I like, that kind of thing, and with loss aversion. So say someone living in a 5-story house who has 5-bedroom house, something happens and they have to move into a 1-bedroom place. That person is going to suffer more than someone who moved from a 2 to a 1-bedroom. Right. In other words, it's the perception of poverty that creates the illness and the stress
and the comparison to others as well.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So what you're saying is that we live like kings, and that's being beamed out, right, to these people who have nothing, and so their perception, in the same way that we see people who are living that Hollywood life. Imagine what it's like, to be in the third world and see that sort of thing. That creates that perception that I'm shit. I'm at the bottom of the rung.
Well, and these people are magic somehow. Like there's some kind of like insane injustice cosmically that means that these people get to enjoy this absurd lifestyle of luxury. And I was born into abject poverty, and it's
especially when they're dumb. Like you're watching people like the Kardashian kind of level of, it's like, how did you earn this? You know what I mean? Like there was a time in our history where I'm sure there was a certain level of earning of your comfort, right? People taking care of you because you were good at something, and you were helping the survival of the tribe. Confucius said that the job of the people at the top is to rule in the interest of the people underneath them. And what we see now is people who are at the top ruling against the interests of the people beneath them, like the Gina Rineharts and that sort of thing. And I think that creates rage.
Well, yeah, and I think that's if just to add to your theory about there being geographical and ancestral concepts regarding like attitudes to hoarding and so on.
Yeah,
I have a theory which is geographically based politics, as in places that are hot, right? Like Australia. I would say large swathe, Africa, South America, pretty much everywhere except the like. You think about the Nordic countries.
Are we talking hot and dry, or hot and wet?
Hot and dry.
But there's a big difference.
That's true. But I guess I'm just generalizing it to the extreme. So let's. So the places that are best governed, universally agreed, is like the Scandinavian countries. Cold as shit. And you got to spend a lot of time indoors.
Yeah, no one wants to invade there.
Yeah, and so but
so they got a pretty stable, homogenous culture there.
Yeah, so they have to spend a lot of times indoors with each other. And so therefore you get a kind of sense of like, okay, well, if people are deeply unhappy, we're probably going to hear from them and they're going to be knocking on the door. So let's make sure everyone's taken care of.
Yeah, and you need to be quiet.
And there's fewer people as well. And in the hotter, sweatier parts, it's like, you know what? The environment is so hot that it's just harder to come together. Large groups of people come together is actually annoying because it's hot and you don't, So anyway, this is just my theory why.
Yeah, I've got a lot of these sorts of theories.
Places that are.
I also think that like stoic, pragmatic people were much better at surviving Scandinavian winters than impulsive, emotional people. Yeah. So you can see that sort of,
Yeah, of course. Oh man. Speaking of stoicism, I think, the energy that I have for this conversation is limitless, but my bladder capacity is not.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's the kind of conversation that the depth and the richness of the ground that we've covered, I think speaks volumes about how much more there is to say about a whole lot of this other stuff in future conversations. So
I'd love
to have you back. Just before we go, would you like to plug anything that you're doing or where people can find you, etc.?
Yep. So first and foremost, there's the 1st of February gig Do you want to just
The fiery
give the
fundraiser?
deets
Yeah,
for
so
that first?
I'm organising that. So there's 9 artists. Alyrah is one of them. We've also got Golden Orb, myself. We've got Old Mate, Kegels, Madam Wu, Bella Fiorentino, Sade or Shard. If I'm forgetting anyone, I apologise. And there's going to be art by Griffin and Elsa Isabella, and Mama Smoke is going to be doing food. It's going to be a truly righteous... Oh, also Babetron is performing. It's her debut performance. It's going to be amazing.
Okay.
Now, that you can get tickets to that through papafire.com. That's probably the easiest way to go, papafire.com. If you want to come along, 1st of February in Sydney, doors at 7:30, and it's in a warehouse. So once you get your ticket, you will be told where to go.
Raising monies.
That's right. And so where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Alyrah, Alyrah 108, and Facebook, Alyrah. And I actually have an EP, The Twin Flame Portal, coming out on the 28th of February. 5 tunes, been working on pretty hard the last year or so. It's the second EP I've released. I did one in 2017, 3 tracks. So, yeah, Spotify and all the usual places. And, yeah, look, I would really love to do more fundraising kind of stuff. To me, that's really where it's at, the heart of it really feels like the best use of having a good time with everybody and raising that good energy and putting the love back into, this time, tending to the earth. Is where it's at. So thank you for being an organizer, facilitator, and big source of love in Sydney, Papa.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thanks again. We'll see you next time. Thanks, good people. Ciao.
Ciao.